Hello, my name is Raymond Hughes, and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project conducted by the Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today we have the distinct honor to interview Charles Seipelt here at the New England Retirement Center on Beachmont Avenue in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Charles, would you tell us your full name and where you were born, please?
My name is Charles Seipelt, and the way that is spelled is Seipelt, pronounced Seipelt. I was born in Huntington Township, Brown County, Ohio, in February the 19th, 1928. I was one of three children. My brother was 2 years older than I was. My sister was a little better than 2 years younger than I was. We lived at Huntington Township until we were time to start the school, and then we moved down east of Ruple about 3 miles out right before you get to Eagle Creek Bridge on Route 52. And now that road is an old road, still there, but they put a new road in, and that's on the other side of the house where we were raised. And from then we moved to out on Schofield Road, up on top of a hill that my brother and I both had to walk to school down about a mile to catch the school bus of a morning. And we would catch the bus and ride the front seat up to pick up the rest of the children. And we always had a front seat by the heater because we got on the bus when the bus driver first came out to pick up everyone. So we was kind of lucky on that part. Then we moved from there out on North Pole Pike, out of Ruple, like 4 miles out of Ruple, still out close to Eagle Creek Bridge, which the covered bridge is still there yet today. It's probably one of the only one in Brown County. And from then, we lived there till my father passed away in 1948. And then we moved it down to Ruple. Then from there, I went to Norwood, to General Motors, and that's where I put my 38 years in. And when I went there in 1949, and then I worked there till 1950, and they started the draft in 1950 after the Korean conflict started. And I got drafted right away, and they sent me to Camp Pickett, Virginia for basic training. And then they put me on an airplane, that first time I was ever on an airplane, and flew me to California. And from there I was on a ship for 2 weeks. Landed in Japan, and then I landed in Korea, and I spent from April of 1951 till January of 1952 in Korea. And I was attached to the 25th Division, 65th Combat Engineer Battalion, and that was about what we did was a little bit of everything as far as engineers. They do all kind of construction, and usually combat engineers are frontline divisions. So we were pretty much on the front line all the time as I was spending in Korea. And but before that, in 1946, I almost got drafted. I was still in school, and I took a physical, and they said they would call me in 21 days Well, during that 21 days, they quit drafting, so I never got drafted in 1946. Then in 1948, they started drafting again, and I had a 2-month deferment to help put in the crops that we lived on the farm, and they quit drafting again. Then in 1950, that's when I actually got drafted and ended up in the Army. And,
What date did you get drafted?
I got drafted on the 6th day of October in 1950, and got discharged on the 5th day of July 1952. And which I was in combat. I only had to spend 21 months. You're supposed to spend 2 years, but since I was in combat, I got out in 21 months. So that was a little different.
Hmm.
Then in 1956, there was an Army Reserve that company that started in Georgetown, Ohio, and so I joined the Army Reserve, and I spent 3 years in the Army Reserve till I got married, and my time was up, so I never did re-up. But I kind of wished I would have stayed in now, but I didn't do it. But you're young then, and you don't realize what it's like that it could be a good thing to stay in the service. But I didn't do it.
Now, you went for basic training to Camp Pickett in Virginia?
I went to, when I got drafted, they sent me to Fort Knox, and I was down there for like 2 weeks and got all my shots and all my clothing, and they put us on a train, quite a few of us that went in the same day I did, but there was 2 twin brothers that I knew that went in when I did, got drafted when I did, and they ended up in Fort Knox, but they sent them to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But some of the guys that I went in with ended up in Virginia, same place I did. But I think I was the only one out of the outfit that I was with up there that actually got sent to Korea. I think the rest of them, it was a National Guard, 43rd National Guard Division out of the New England states. And I think they went to Germany. But somehow or other, I ended up going to Korea. And the rest of the guys that I went in basic training with ended up in Germany. So that was...
Did you have any special training in basic training for engineers or not?
When I took basic training, it was all engineer. That whole division up there, I think, I can't say it all of it was, but what I was in and what the ones that were taking training with me was all engineer, and it was combat engineer. And before they sent me to California, they pulled 60 of us, I think, out and run us through combat engineer. It was day and night that we were going through for like 2 weeks, a special training that they didn't tell us they were going to send us over there, but that's what it was about, getting us ready to send over there. Then one night, the 2 colonels came in the barracks and checking everybody out and make sure you had all your clothing and everything that you had. And then they left and they said, well, that's just a false alarm. And then they came back in about 11 o'clock and they checked again and they said, no, that's a false alarm. And then they came in at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, put all your clothes in the bag and fall out and get in the truck that's sitting out front. And that truck took off and ended up underneath an airplane, which I had never been in an airplane before. And they said, throw your baggage in the cargo of the airplane and climb in the airplane, which I thought, well, that for me was going to be a challenge because I had never been in a plane. But I ended up by a window, and the person who was sitting beside me, I think he was scared. And I really wasn't too scared. I was young. It didn't bother me too much. But there was only 60 of us that they pulled out of that camp at night, and they had one plane load of 60 personnel. And then we end up in California. And they never told us we were going to California till we got up in the sky. And we had a lieutenant with us, and he told us that you guys are going to end up in California. So from there, they ended up going on a ship, and I got signed to the ship about 3 days before they loaded the ship.
Where were you at in California?
I was in Camp Stoneman, California, and that's a processing place for to go overseas. And they got pulled out. I got pulled out of like 3 days and went on the ship for 3 days ahead of time. They said, you guys are going to be permanent KPs. I think there were 60 of us. And they put us on the ship. They said, you guys be permanent KPs on that ship. Well, if you know what KP is, I mean, that's kitchen police, you know, and that's what they call it in the service. But we ended up with the best job on the ship, I think, because we had 3 meals on and 3 meals off. And they said, you guys can come in the gallery, which that's what the Navy calls their mess hall, and eat anytime you want to. And all we did was fill up sugar bowls and made sure the tables were wiped off, and salt shakers was full. And for 3 meals, that's what we did. And we did not have to wash any dishes because all the trays went in a big tray dishwasher and went to the dishwasher. So there wasn't no dishes to wash. So we really had, for 2 weeks, I think that was an honor for me to get to do that. And also in basic training, I had a rifle that was issued, an M1 rifle, which that was our rifle that we had to train with. And I had one issued to me that was really in perfect shape. The barrel on that thing was just as shiny. And the captain checked that out one morning and looked at that, and he said, you can pull out, you can be the battalion runner for the day. And I thought, well, that's an honor to get to be able to do that. And what I did was deliver messages, papers, or whatever from one company to another company during the day. So that was a good honor that I always thought that somehow or other I got that job. And evidently I had a good rifle too, and he must have thought it was because he let me be the battalion runner for that day. So that was part of mine.
So you were on board the ship, and how long did it take you to? Where did you go?
We
when you on the ship, where did you land at?
we left California, and exactly date I don't know what date it was, but we ended up in 2 weeks on the ship. It took 2 weeks, and we ended up in Yokohama, Japan. And then from there, we ended up in a camp around Tokyo, someplace. And then from there, they put us on a train in Japan, and we rode that train maybe 2 days, maybe, I don't know how long, from one end of Japan to the other, and we ended up on the other end of Japan. I'd have to look at the map to see exactly where it was, but we ended up in a little camp. They called it Camp Moore, and it was in Japan. And if I remember, it was up on top of a mountain. And then from there, we was there for maybe 2 days, and then we took us down and put us on a Japanese ferry boat that didn't have any beds. all they had was straw mats on the floor, and it took 12 hours from Japan to Korea, and we ended up in Busan, Korea. That's where we landed at. And from there we got on a train in Korea, and the train didn't have no beds. All they had was boards for a bed on the train. And I think, if I remember, we stayed on that train like 2 days to get up to the. I don't guess it went all the way to the front line, but I think we ended up on trucks that getting to the front line, and we finally got to the front line. And I hadn't been there over a week, and they said that we were getting hit pretty heavy from Chinese at that time, and so we had to lay out minefields, put out a lot of personnel mines, and then we end up moving back. I don't know how far it was, but we had to set up again back behind the front line, and then eventually, maybe a week or so later, we made a big push. U.S. made a big push, and so we moved on back up. Then we had to retrieve all the mines, and they were a lot of personnel that was assigned to take up those mines, because that was part of the engineers to lay the mines and then have to take them up so you could move on up. But that was a dangerous job, and they was giving you $50 extra a month if you would go out there and take those mines up. So there was I was assigned to that a couple of times, but there was somebody always volunteered for that $50 that they never did. I never did have to go out and take them to mines, but a lot of those guys that were going out and taking those mines were getting kind of blowed up and never did come back. So that was a dangerous job, and I was just lucky that I never did have to go to take any of them mines up like that at that time. But then from then on, I don't know where all we were. We were up around the 38th parallel, I know, because I looked at the map just not very long ago, and I do have a map of the whole map of Korea. And Miami Township had a memorial for the Korean veterans about 2-3 years ago, and I went out there and they had the tent set up for all the Korean veterans, and I happened to be sitting beside a fellow that he told me, he said, I got a map of the whole Korea. He said, I'll make you one. So he did, and he gave me the map of Korea, North and South Korea. And so I looked on that map, and I could tell then whereabouts the 38th parallel. And I knew it back about where the letters I had written home to my mother and all of it. At that time, I guess I knew about where I was, and I looked on the map, and I could tell that I was up close to the 38th most of the time I was over there. And before I left over there, the engineers, they would always cut the trees down, and they were using the cedar trees, and they were making signal corps posts for the signal corps, for the lines, so we had a lot of trees that we had cut down and made signal corps post, or telephone or whatever. I don't know what they were, but I guess that's what they used them for. But we had stacks of those poles piled up as 20 feet high, if I remember, because there was a lot of them that were piled up. And then another thing we did, we built a lot of roads, And at that time, they didn't have any gravel or anything over there, so we would go up in the hills, and we'd put C3 as for the compound. It's a explosive. It's mold. It's about like butter. You mold it, and you mold out underneath of a rock and put a cap in it, and then run a fuse to it and set it off, and it explodes. Well, they would blow them big rock out of there, and they would end up rolling down over the hill, and they'd end up on the bottom down on the road. Then we'd go down there and blast them again with that same kind of dynamite. Well, it wasn't dynamite. It was, they called it C3 compound, what it was. And we'd bust them up, and that's what we'd use for gravel on the roads. Then another thing is that there wasn't much over there, hardly anything over there. We lived in summertime with 2-man pup tents, and that's what we lived in. And at the time, we would have a shower would be in one big squad tent, but you'd have to rent or sign out a truck to go down, which it was back farther, it was back off the front line where the big tent with the shower was. You'd have to take a truck, and anybody want to go take a shower would get on the truck, and we'd get down to the tent. So, and then they would issue us new clean clothes, because they did all the laundry, and you never got your same clothing, but you got the same kind. The military clothes all the same, but you would end up with clean clothes. Maybe every 2 or 3 days you'd get to take a shower like that. But and then in the winter time, before we moved to before winter got there, we took some of the logs and we made they call it a big bunker. We made this big bunker, and we did find some old tin. We laid tin over top of it and then put dirt over top of it. Well, that was going to be our winter quarters for the winter. But the 2nd Division relieved the 25th Division, which I was in, and they put us back in reserve. And the 2nd Division took over our bunker that we had made for the winter. So we ended up back, I don't know, 10 miles back maybe, as reserve for a month or so. And at that time, we did get squad tents to live in, and they did have some plywood that they would put on the inside of the squad tent to make it a little bit tighter and kind of block the wind. And all we had was 2 little stoves, one in each end, and they were just little fuel oil stoves, and all it would run on was a 5-gallon can of fuel oil that was on the outside, and you'd put that fuel oil tank can on at the nighttime, but in the morning it would be gone, and somebody'd have to get up and go out there and put another can on to keep that stove going. And then we did have mountain sleeping bags that we could sleep in, and we did have, in them squad tents, we did get cots, folded cots to sleep on with a mountain sleeping bag for the winter. But in the summertime, you didn't have no cot. All you did was sleep in a pup tent on the ground, and you might lay a poncho or something down on the ground in the summertime to sleep on, but there wasn't no cots or anything in those pup tents. And everything over there was a tents. We never had any buildings at all. All the mess hall was all in the cooked in the squad tents. And then, but we were always lucky that engineers, when we went to work, we always had to take all our equipment with us, like shovels and mattocks or whatever we needed. And we always hauled on a truck, and we always rode to wherever we were going every day. And when noontime came at 12 o'clock, well, they would always say, well, they haven't brought our chow out yet. And they would always bring our chow up to us. and they had these containers that would keep the chow hot. And we always had a hot meal, but sometimes they wouldn't get there till maybe 1 or 1:30 in the day instead of 12 o'clock. But they'd say, well, we got to wait till they get you. We can't work unless we have something to eat. So they did let us have time off till the chow got there. So that was another challenge too.
What type of weapon did you carry while you were working there, Charles?
He was always assigned to an M1 rifle, and we'd always have to have that rifle, and I had to have our helmet liner with a steel helmet on top of it. Every day, that's where we went, and we had to wear that even when we were working, and we would always take our rifles, and they'd say, stack the rifles. So you stack the rifles, and everybody stacks them together in they call it stack the rifles, and they're all stacked in one pile together. And so if you needed them, they were always there. You might have to grab one, but maybe you would never grab the same one that you had. But there was times that you'd be out there, and we were close to the front line. There were times out there when our enemy would throw that artillery into us while we would be working out there. So we'd have to find a hole to crawl in till they would take care of the incoming artillery that was coming in on us, and they would eventually knock it out, and then we'd go on back to what we were doing. But there was one time, if I remember, they said the captain, I think it was, went up to check things out, and I think his Jeep got hit by something. I don't think he got wounded, if I remember, but at that day they said, well, it's too close up there now, so we can't go. We'd always move back maybe at lunchtime, and then they would bring their lunch out, and we'd have to move back about 3 or 4 miles, I guess, to eat lunch. Then we'd go back up to the front line again. But that time when his Jeep got hit, they said, well, it's too dangerous up there. We can't go back up there this afternoon, so we had to stay back a little bit farther that day. So I do remember that part of it there.
During your time there, did you ever have to go north of the 38th parallel?
I don't think we did. I don't remember at that time where we did or not. We were up close to that, but I don't know if we went north of 38th or not at that time. And I don't really know that when I was over, that was in 1951, and mostly in 51. I left in early 52 to come back to the States. But at that time, I don't remember them calling that the 38th parallel, because I think that was set up later when they had the peace treaty that they named that 38th parallel, and I have a book on there that I bought. I don't know where I did get this book at, but it tells in there about the 38th parallel, and I think it's 15 mile wide, and nobody, the North Koreans or UN forces is supposed to be anything to do with that 38th parallel. That's supposed to be a neutral piece of land, and no one is supposed to have any, go in even on it. So I don't know nowadays where you can get in on it or not. But I never did get to do that. But they say that you can go back as an honor to go back to Korea, but you pay your own way back to Korea, and then the Korean government will take care of you once you're over there. They say that they put you up in hotels, which nowadays I guess it's all modern. But when I was over there, it was really torn up, really bad. There wasn't anything over there. But nowadays, I guess it's almost like United States is here in this country. Everything is modern, and I guess it's altogether different.
Now, were you actually in the 25th Division, and what was the Engineer Combat Battalion that you were in also? Explain that, if you would.
Yes, I was in the 65th Combat Engineer Battalion, and the battalion was attached to the 25th Infantry Division. And so we were part, I guess, of the 25th Infantry Division, but we were just a battalion, one battalion with three line companies and one headquarters company, and that was that was what the battalion was.
I see.
So I don't know if there was more than one engineer battalion in a division or not, but the one I was in was the 65th Combat Engineer Battalion. So I don't know.
Now, did you ever come into contact with any of the Chinese while you were over there?
I never did actually come in contact with them, but the infantry would be up on the front line, and every once in a while they would pick up a wounded Chinese, and they would bring them by us on a litter jeep. And I do remember seeing, a few of those that had been captured, and they probably were wounded because they were on a litter jeep. And I remember that. But I did see some that had been killed, Chinese. So I guess I was pretty close to where some of them were anyway. But as far as being person to person of some of them, I never was. No.
So you were responsible for building the roads, laying the landmines, installing the communication poles and things.
Yes, we did built a lot of roads, and we built a lot of bridges. Mostly they were pontoon bridges that we would construct, and we would put the pontoon bridges across the river for the tanks to cross, and the tanks would cross on those pontoon bridges. Well, in the springtime in Korea, it's called the monsoon, and it rains about like it has been here this spring, but rained about every day, and there would be a lot of water in the river. So we would build a pontoon bridge, and one time we were my platoon was out on the bridge that we had constructed pontoon bridge, and so you had to pull. They call it pulling guard on the bridge, make sure the bridge stayed in contact and everything. So the platoon that I was in was on the bridge, and the water kept getting higher and higher, and we had the battalion commander was a colonel, and he was out there on the bridge with us, and he didn't let us leave off of that bridge, but finally he said, we got to get off of that bridge, and he said, everybody hold to the person in front of you and hold your rifle overhead, and we'll walk. He took us off there, and that water was up around our neck. If I remember, that was really a dangerous thing that we got off that bridge, and we got on the trucks, and we finally got out of there. So there wasn't nobody pulling guard on that bridge that night. But during the night, that bridge went away from there, and it ended up down about 3-4 miles on down that Han River. So
the Han River?
Han, called the Han River.
Yes.
And from that, we were lucky to get off of there, because if we'd stayed on there, I guess we'd have probably ended up down that river too. But he did take us off. But he did have to lead us off of there, though. And I mean, there was water up around our neck, though.
Oh my
And
goodness.
you had to hold your rifle and hold to the person in front of you, so everybody would be holding to somebody to be able to get off of that bridge. But that was pretty much experience that I went through pretty much while I was over there. You know, but other than being in actual combat, I mean, I was right there, you know, on the front line all the time. But as far as the engineers, I mean, they really, if they had to use the engineers, which they did one time right after I got over there, before we were getting hit there to move back, they did put us out on the front line, laying out there all night with a rifle, making sure that there was no enemy come across, you know, before we got moved out. And I did have to do that too, so I never did forget that either. So that was.
Well, they use you combat engineers for everything, don't they?
They use the combat engineers. They're almost like the Navy Seabees, I guess. They construct whatever there is to do as far as construction. They do it.
And then they can make you a rifleman too.
They can make you a rifleman. They can use it for about. And when I was in basic training, that's what they taught us. They said a combat engineer is an all-around person, and they can use you for whatever you want to be needed for. So a lot of that was what happened, you know, when you're in those situations like that. Sometimes you end up in a situation that you maybe not wanting to be into, but anyway, you're there, you know, you do the best you can do. So that's what it ended up being.
So what happened? When did you get pulled back off of the lines, and where did you go from there?
We pulled back in right before I left. I left in January of '52. I mean, that's where I got relieved, and I don't know exactly whereabouts we were, but we were back from the front line. I don't know, 10 miles maybe. I don't know how far it was. But after I left, I think they had to. They was only back there for a month in reserve, but then I think that they went back up on the front line. But it happened to be, which I was from Brown County, and I ended up over there. Now, when I landed in my company, I told them I was drafted. Well, they didn't know what that was, because all those persons were regular Army, and they were all enlisted personnel. And the 25th Division was stationed in Hawaii till the Korean conflict started, and they moved from Hawaii to Korea. And those guys were all volunteers. And when I got in my company, I was the first guy that ever got drafted. And then they couldn't realize that. They said, "You got drafted?" And I said, "Yeah, I got drafted." So I was the first person in that company, I think, that got drafted. And then I ended up with a friend of mine that came from Cincinnati, that he ended up in the same outfit I did. And he and I got to be real good friends. And so we were good friends, and which I was aware before he was, and then he left after I did. So he told me that they moved back up when after I left over there back up to the front lines, and whereabouts they went to, I don't know. But so when I came back to the States, I ended up in Camp Stoneman again. I took 2 weeks on on the ship on the way back, and when I went over there, I was a private, and then when I left over there, I had got promoted to a staff sergeant. So on the ship, being a staff sergeant, I didn't have too much duty to do, and so going over, I was a KP, but coming back, I still had it pretty nice for 2 weeks on the ship, and then we ended up back in Camp Stoneman again, and then from there I don't know how long we were there, 3 or 4 days maybe, and got processed, and then they put us on a troop train. And during that time, they had a lot of troop trains, and they put us on a troop train, and we rode that troop train all the way to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and that's where we got processed. And then I got assigned to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and that's where I ended up at till I got discharged. That was in the Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. So I spent.
Where's Camp McCoy, Wisconsin? What city is near there?
Camp McCoy, Wisconsin is a little town called Minnesota, is Winona. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Winona, Minnesota. And Camp McCoy was, if I remember, was maybe 7 or 8 miles from that little town. And then the closest town was Madison, I think, was the largest, biggest city. And my friend that was from Cincinnati, he ended up over there too, and he had an automobile, and which I didn't have an automobile at that time. He had an automobile, so he headed up to the camp. And so on the weekend, he and I would go into some of the towns. And if I remember, he and I one weekend we had the Saturday and Sundays off. Saturday at noon. We always had an inspection on Saturday morning, and then they'd let us off at noon, and then you'd be off the rest of the Saturday, and then you'd be off all day Sunday. Then he and I would ride around and maybe stay somewhere overnight on Saturday night. And if I remember, he and I went into Madison it was in the springtime, so the weather was nice at that time up there. And we went to Madison, I think, Wisconsin, which I think that may have been about 50 miles from Camp McCoy, if I remember. I don't know exactly right now when it was.
So when did you get discharged?
I got discharged on the 5th day of July. Now, I went in, I got drafted on the 6th day of July, and the 4th day of July was a holiday, and they wouldn't let us, they didn't relieve us on the 4th because it was a holiday, and they always give you your whatever allowance pay that you had coming to you. So the banks were closed on the 4th of July, so we had to wait till the 5th to get paid, and then they relieved us on the 5th of July. Then I caught a train from Wisconsin to Cincinnati, but I ended up in transferring that train. I caught a train from Camp McCoy to Chicago. Then I had to transfer on a train from one train to another in Chicago. And I know, if I remember, I had to go pretty far from one train to the other. And there's some other little soldier that was with me that I think from Indiana. And he was kind of small at that time. And he had a hard time carrying his duffel bag because we had all the duffel bags. All of our clothing that we brought home with us. And he had his, but he had a hard time. I think he had to drag it. And we finally caught the train, and then he got off somewhere in Indiana, and I ended up in Cincinnati. Then I don't remember. I must have got a bus at that time. I think the Greyhound buses ran At that time, I was still living in Ripley, Ohio, and I think the Greyhound buses ran at that time. I don't think they do nowadays. Up Route 52, but like years ago, those buses run that.
Now, were you single all this time?
I was single all
Charles?
the time I was in there, and I was, and
When did you get married then?
I didn't get married till 1958.
Where'd you meet your wife at, and how'd you meet her?
Well, she was actually from Ripley too, so I ended up meeting her up there in Ripley, and that's where we got married. It was in.
What was your wife's name?
Her
is-
name?
is-
Last name, you mean? Or what it was?
Yes,
Her last name was Hauke, 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 and her father and mother.
Her first name was?
Hauke.
Her first name,
Oh, her first name was Mary. Mary Hauke. And they own a farm out on out of Ripley on the 68, 62 on the AA highway, and that's where she was raised at. And her and I was married 56 years. Last November the 22nd made the 56 years that we were married. So been married a long time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So
And how many children did you folks have?
we had a son and a daughter. And the son's the oldest, and he just turned 50 years old. And my daughter is 2 years younger. She just turned 48 in September, and his birthday was in October, the 13th of October, and hers is the 28th of September.
And what are their names, Charles?
Well, his first name is supposed to be Stephen, but he just pronounced his name Steve, and his middle initial is the same as mine, Charles, his middle name, but he never does use that, and he might use a C, but his name is Steve. That's what he calls himself, and he's right now he's a Cincinnati firefighter for the city of Cincinnati, and he's stationed at the Lunken Airport. And my daughter's name is Lisa Salasico. That's her married name, and she works at the law firm in Cincinnati ever since she's been out of school. So she's got a lot of years down there. And
I neglected to ask you earlier your mother and father's names.
my father's name was Joe Robert, and he always pronounced his name as Seipelt, and he always liked people to say, pronounce his name right. If somebody pronounced it wrong, he never did like that, you know. And my nephews and my brother's children, they always pronounced the name as Seipelt, but my father would never, he would have never liked that if he'd been living. He would never like that because his name was Seipelt. That's what he always said. And
your mother's name?
my mother's name was Lucy, and her maiden name was Warren, and she was raised in around Aberdeen, and my father was raised around Ripley, and his ancestors was truck farmers. His father and uncle, they always raised a lot of truck garden in Ripley, and which when he was young, he used to, which at that time they had mostly horse and wagon, so they would deliver all the produce in the town with the horse and wagon. And nowadays, that's all a thing of the past, but that would have been years ago, because he was born in 1895 is when he was born, and my mother was born in 1900. And my father passed away when he was only 53 years old, and my mother happened to live till she was almost 96. She was born in 1900, and then she died in 1995, and Her birthday was in March 22nd or 26th of March, and she was 95 on the 26th of March, and then she passed away that September, 12th of September in 1995. So she was close to 96 years old, so she lived a long life. So.
Now, you said before, I think, that you worked for General Motors. How long? How long did you work there?
I started there in April of 1949 for General Motors at Fisher Body in Norwood, and then I got drafted in 1950, and then I came back and ended up at the other side of the Chevrolet plant in the same building called the Chevrolet plant, and so I ended up there.
Is that in Norwood?
That's in Norwood too. Yes, there's all one plant, but all one building, but they called it two different plants. It was Fisher Body and the Chevrolet. Then they ended up called GMAD, and they combined them both together and called it GMAD.
Right.
And then, so I ended up there with, counting the time I was in the service, it's about 38 years altogether. So when they closed the plant, that's when I finally give it up, you know. So
Now, when was that?
that was in 1987, the 27th day of August is the last day that they built a car that run off of that line. Was the 27th day of August in 1987. So from then on, I never. Well, that year, in 1987, I had a triple bypass, a heart bypass, and I was off for like 6 weeks. Then they sent me back to work, so I went back to work till they closed that plant that day in September, in August. I took that back, 22nd day of August. But I went back to work, and I was, I guess, okay, to go back. So they sent me back anyway.
So you've had a long retirement.
I've had a long retirement, I guess. I got to be lucky I got to say that I've been lucky to have a good retirement for 27.
What did your wife ever have a job or anything like that, Charles?
Well, when her and I got married, she worked for Western Southern, and she worked for like 5 years. And then when my son was born, she never did go back down there in fact, she couldn't go back. They wouldn't let her go back after when she had a child. They said once you have a child, you can't go back. But nowadays they probably could go back.
Yes.
At that time, she couldn't go back. Then she never did really. She stayed home and raised my son and daughter, and she did all the gardening and mowing the grass and stuff like that when I would be working. And then she did end up working in the cafeteria of the school one time for 4 or 5 years after the children got older. But as far as working back to Western Southern, she never did go back there again. So she never really had another regular job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we've just about reached the end of our interview, and I want to tell you how much we appreciate it, and it's very interesting. And is there anything else you'd like to add at this time?
I think I've said about everything I know to say.
Okay.
Oh, did I say I went on the honor flight?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my son and daughter, they had this honor flight, and they said one time, you want to go on that honor flight? Said, give us your information. Well, I gave them all my information, the military, and they sent the application in, and then my daughter, they sent it to my son and said, let's see, I had it in about a year, and last June, I think it was, the guy called me from Dayton, because they sent it into Dayton for the honor flight. And the fellow called me from Dayton and said, you're on the schedule to go on the honor flight, and you got your choice of July or August or October. Well, my children said, well, if you go in July and August, it's going to be awful hot up to Washington. It said, why don't you put in for October? And I said, okay, we'll do it in October. So I took the October flight, and so my son was going to go. My daughter said, I wanted to go on that. And he said, well, I've been up there lots of times. He said, I'll let you go. So he let my daughter go. So she had all the information that she knew, and I didn't know a lot of it. And so we, when time came for October for us to go, well, she had made all the contacts with the people on the honor flight, and she knew where to park. It was all free parking up to the airport. So her and I, we had to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning at Dayton Airport, and she knew where to park because she had the information, and she picked me up around 12 o'clock, I think, at night, and this was on the 6th day of October, and we got to Dayton at 2:30 or so, and we was in the airport at 3 o'clock. That's when we were supposed to be there, and at that time, she had turned all the information. They had everything lined out for us. They had a T-shirt that you would had to wear, and they gave all the veterans a gray T-shirt with the honor flight on the front of it. And my daughter they called them a guardian, and all the guardians, they had a different color T-shirt, and then all the personnel that was in charge, they had a different color T-shirt, and there was one plane load, which they said that was the first charter plane that they had used on the honor flight, and there was 95 veterans on that flight that I was on, and the rest of them was the guardians. So there was one seat left on the plane. They said one empty seat, and with the veterans and the guardians, and they signed us. They said we got 3 buses when we get there, and said you're signed to the 3rd bus. They had everybody signed to the bus that they're supposed to be in. So my daughter and I was signed to the 3rd bus. And then there was one fellow there didn't have any guardian, so they signed him to my daughter. My daughter had to take care of him too, but he was a Vietnam veteran, and he pretty well knew where he was at. He was younger than most of the rest of the people, so he had his own camera, so he was taking pictures too. So anyway, we got in the plane, and then wheelchairs. They took wheelchairs and put them in the plane. And when they got there, they took them out, and they took them, put them in the buses. They had 3 buses, and they put the wheelchairs in the buses. And then when the buses took off, they had a motorcycle police escort. So wherever they need to go, they had an escort. The buses would get wherever they're supposed to be on the time they're supposed to be there. Then we went to all the monuments, the World War II, the Air Force has got a new place there, and the Vietnam and the Korean. And so at noontime, we ended up at the Air Force Museum, which is a big spiral that sticks up 270 feet. There's 3 of them that stick in it, 300 or 270 feet into the sky. They reach that high, and at that time we was 11:30. They gave us a box lunch from Arby's for lunch. So there was like a little wall there, and the people was in the everybody was sitting on the wall there to eat their lunch out of the box. And then we left there and went to the Korean memorial, and then we end up at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and they said we got to be there at 2 o'clock. And with the escort, we made it when we were supposed to be there. We were right there, so we got to see the change of the guard, and then we ended up that night at a big buffet. They took us to a big buffet. Then you could eat whatever you wanted at the buffet, and then the next thing we was back on the plane again, and ended up back in Dayton 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And when we got off the plane, there was lined up people in the airport on both sides, as far almost as you could see, with wishing us a welcome back home, which is a great welcome. I mean, they really, and at that time, my step-grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they live in Dayton. So their parents and had brought them there. There was 5 of the children, and then the mother and father. And they were there and to greet us. And I didn't know they were going to be there, but my daughter knew that because she had already told them about it. And like I say, they lived in Dayton, so they didn't have far to go. But there was a lot of people there that welcomed us home. So that was a great experience. And I've told a lot of people about they need to go on the honor flight. And I just saw a fellow the other day that I met over to Tractor Supply, and I told him, I said, "You been on the honor flight?" He said, "No." I said, "You need to go on the honor flight." And he said, "Well, I never thought." I said, "You need to go." And I said, "I got an application. I got some applications, and I had a lot of them made. I'll get you one." So I stopped, and he lives out in the golf course out there off of 10 Mile in Pierce Township. And he told me where he lived, and I lived pretty close. I said, "I'll get you an application." So the other day I stopped over to his house and dropped the application off. I said, "You got to go on that honor flight." So I hope he does, So I think he will.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, we certainly want to thank you for your service to our country during the Korean conflict, and we appreciate everything that you shared with us today.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
sir.
much. Thank you.